Okay, so hear me out. Twin Star Exorcist is one of the most undervalued and exceptional battle shonen out there. The fights are intense physical showdowns, the artwork is of the highest quality the genre has to offer, and damn, the characters are so likable. That said, I wouldn't suggest that it impresses in the same way One Piece, Hunter x Hunter, or JoJo's Bizarre Adventure might, because it simply does not. Those stories are perhaps a bit more dynamic in their power systems, and they branch out into these hugely imaginative worlds that make our own seem boring. In comparison, Twin Star comes across as somewhat generic. The protagonist is a traditional hot-headed young boy, the setting is modern-day Japan, and the power system is standard fare exorcism that is becoming all too common in shonen manga. It's not that unique at face value. But then what's the catch, and what makes it special? Well, Twin Star Exorcist has a trick up its sleeve. The titular twin stars, Rokuro and Benio, are prophesized to eventually get married and have a child that will save the world. The story follows the two as they not only get stronger as exorcists, but become more intimate as lovers over many years. This results in a rare genre fusion of romance and battle shonen, incorporating the blooming relationship of its two main characters into the action, story, and character drama. Both genres are fully explored in satisfying ways, but it's how those genres support each other that sells the idea. In other battle shonen, it has become almost expected for a story to delay any progression between romantic interests until the very end. These are action manga with high stakes, so too much focus on romance would typically only serve as filler between world-shattering conflicts and mind-bending plot twists. Naruto has to stop Ninja Wars, Luffy has to claim right to the One Piece, Ichigo has to save every person he possibly can, and Goku has to... Well, Goku does have a wife, but there's more life on the moon than there is romance in Dragon Ball. Point is, Goku has to become the strongest in the universe and beat up any alien freak looking to blow up Earth. There's no time to show him developing a deep, romantically charged relationship with Chi-Chi. Sorry everybody. I say all this to clarify the difference between having a romantic pairing come true at the end of a story versus the romance playing an active role in the story's progression. Twin Star falls under the latter category, as it uses romance as a fundamental component and does so effortlessly. Take the first major arc for example. We're introduced to Rokuro, a lovable twerp who fails at just about everything he tries to do, and Benio, a quiet girl that seemingly hates everything, with the exception of Ohagi. After an unexpected meeting, one thing becomes clear. Rokuro and Benio will struggle to get along. One is burning hot and the other is freezing cold. They are equally stubborn and have a remarkable disdain for each other's attitudes. Things are made worse when a prophecy ties their fates together because neither one wants anything to do with the other, much less be stuck in a less than stellar arranged marriage. However, it's important to note that the prophecy is not the source of their changing feelings, it's merely what forces them together. The prophecy can only demand them to develop a relationship, it cannot force them to. The story and surrounding characters pull them together, but they are left to advance their relationship on their own. That helps their romantic progression feel more organic, because regardless of what they're told, they reject the idea until they naturally find reasons to like each other. Initially, their relationship can't seem to get off the ground, and even when they try to be friendly, their personalities clash. If the manga were just a romantic slice of life, the story would probably end here, because they might otherwise choose to leave the situation and never talk again. There would be nothing to pull them together, but that's where the battle shonen elements come into play. Because they are exorcists, their duty is to exorcise the evil monsters known as Kagare. As they encounter fierce enemies far more powerful than themselves, they must rely on their combined strength to overcome impossible odds and face their inner demons. Despite their immense differences, their emotionally trying battles help them to understand one another's weaknesses and strengths. The layers of who they are as people begin to peel away. As all their angst would suggest, the two hold immense pain within their hearts. Being an optimistic child, Rokuro grew up with the dream of exorcising all the Kagare in an effort to help others, only for that dream to be shattered by the sudden deaths of all of his closest friends. Believing he was responsible for the tragedy, he chooses to leave the Exorcist world and gives up on his dream. He truly wants to help others, but the pain of pursuing that dream is far too overwhelming. That is, until he meets Benio, who also carries a heavy burden, the untimely deaths of her parents and brother. However, her trauma response was not to abandon exorcism. Rather, she trained even harder to one day take revenge on the Kagare that killed her family. She emotionally shuts down, disconnecting from others, and dedicates herself to exorcism. When her strength alone is not enough to accomplish that, it reawakens Rokuro's dream. He steps in to help her overcome her trauma, and thereby she helps him with his. Becoming stronger as the twin stars simultaneously means growing as fighters and healing each other's severe trauma. Through learning how to fight together, they actively cultivate a healthy relationship based on empathy. You can see that culminate during the arc's climax, where the two have an incredibly heartbreaking confrontation with Yuto, Rokuro's childhood friend and Benio's brother, who has been revealed to be a major antagonist. It's physically challenging and emotionally devastating for Rokuro and Benio to stand against Yuto, but having the antagonist be personally relevant to both twin stars was a smart choice. Their mutual pain is shared as they exchange blows in a losing battle against someone who betrayed them, but it's their newfound support for one another that keeps them fighting until the very end. They use every bit of their combined strength, and they make real sacrifices, something they could not have done when they first met. It's an excellent battle that represents their growth and care for one another, a surprising feat for a 5-volume long arc, and something that could only be accomplished by utilizing the strengths of both genres. This brings us to a point in the story where Rokuro and Benio have reached some degree of affinity for each other, with their victories and losses developing their bond further. The two still bicker, sure, but it's less aggressive than it used to be, and their interactions are tinged with underlying romantic feelings. They aren't necessarily the perfect match, but they're learning how to be. The arc is capped off with a touching scene of Rokuro gifting Benio new hair clips in an attempt to make her smile after the horrible battle they endured, and man, this is when I was sold on their relationship. In only 5 volumes, their struggles against the Kagare, Yuto, and even their traumas build up this incredibly believable dynamic between them, that they could look past their differences and see their partner for who they truly are. Admittedly, the first arc is hardly outstanding on its own merits, but it establishes that key ingredient as a foundation for Rokuro and Benio's relationship. This is a good time to mention that if you are interested in reading Twin Star, I would highly suggest checking out the extra chapters alongside the numbered chapters. Often these extras lean into the more slice of life and romantic aspects of the manga, which not only serves as welcome downtime between all the action, but as important relationship building. Take the second extra chapter. Rokuro berates Benio for her ineptitude for housework and says no one would ever want to marry her. She takes offense to this and decides to prove him wrong. The next morning, she cleans around the house and cooks lunch. It's hard work and she's not particularly good at it, but she hopes Rokuro will be happy with her efforts. However, before Rokuro can wake up, a cat breaks into their home and makes a mess of everything, and all of her hard work goes down the drain. Completely bummed out, she crashes on the couch and gives up. Rokuro, having woken up and seen the mess, puts together what Benio was trying to do. He begins to praise all the hard work she did, jokingly crediting the work to an elf, and that's when Benio says that she was the elf. She not only wanted to make Rokuro happy, she wanted his praise. It's a simple chapter that doesn't add a lot to the grander narrative, but it's a great way to explore their lives together when there isn't some looming threat over them. And I mean, come on, it's an exceptionally cute moment between all the horribly traumatic battles. I mention these extra chapters because I know there's a lot of fans who have never read them, and newcomers might accidentally skip them completely. These are only available in the physical volumes and are not included in Viz Media's subscription service, so if you read the series that way, then you completely miss out on multiple chapters of content. It's understandable to want to support the manga legally without buying the volumes, but I think you should at least make an exception for these chapters and find somewhere to read them. The Wikia page, which I'll link below, does a good job of showing which volumes specifically have extra or special chapters. At the absolute least, I would recommend reading the special chapter found in volume 21, because it explores the history of two very story-relevant characters and their relationship, something you will probably want to know later down the line. And real quick, one final pit stop before we continue this discussion. I just want to give a shout out to my girlfriend's webtoon, Her Night from Another World. She just started releasing it, but this is actually her second webcomic. She finished her first, so she's already a pretty experienced creator at this point, and I think you can really see that in how much her art and character writing has improved since her first comic. So it would mean a lot if you went and checked it out. I would especially recommend it to someone that's a fan of Twin Star, actually. It's got a big world, it's got fantasy, it's got romance, it's got good comedy. But yeah, I don't want to make a whole big sales pitch or anything. I just thought I would give it a shout out. What I've talked about so far is an introductory course into Twin Star Exorcist, and if you're fully sold on the idea, then feel free to go search out this wonderful story on your own. However, there's a lot more meat on these bones, and I want to further explore why I love this series so much. As such, we're going to be diving into some topics that touch on later plot points, so this is a good jumping off point for those that want to go into the series as blind as possible. For everyone else, let's get to talking about the progression of time, a handful of criticisms, the awful anime adaptation, an abundance of boobs, and some of the sickest power-ups ever drawn. Once you've had your fill of extra goodies and are ready to jump back into the main storyline, Twin Star makes the unexpected decision to include a relatively early time skip. After only a single arc and 5 volumes, we jump a full 2 years forward. Rokuro and Benio are now 16, more characters enter the fold, and the story becomes much more ambitious. A time skip this early into the series is risky, but what I adore about this choice is that it allows for the characters to mature without even being that far into their story, and that is reflected in Yoshiaki Tsukino's writing. For example, Rokuro's childhood friend, Myra, was a particularly annoying love rival during the first arc that I intentionally avoided talking about. But after everything that transpired in that arc, she decided to spend the next 2 years training as an exorcist. Unfortunately, it hasn't quite worked out for her. She has developed ever-growing doubts about her ability to protect others, whether she can live up to her father's legacy, and her chances of catching up to Rokuro and Benio. Instead of being an obnoxious love rival, she has proven herself to be a character with a bit more complexity, and this really couldn't have been done without a time skip. She needed 2 years to develop these complexities and grow as a character. The progression of time might feel sudden, but you'll realize that Twin Star does not waste much time and its story has a kinetic nature. It's always moving forward and making meaningful progress towards a romantic relationship and an even bigger narrative. Sometimes, however, those two are at complete odds with each other. While the ending of the first arc saw Rokuro and Benio start to connect as potential lovers, what you'll see in the second arc and those that follow is twofold: the actualization of their love and the external forces that try to put an end to their love. When the premise of a prophecy puts them in a box to develop a relationship, they actively reject that prophecy, and only now, after they have chosen to pursue a romance of their own free will, their love is not allowed to exist in peace. The story's happenings are always in direct opposition to the status of their relationship. When they want to avoid contact, the prophecy pulls them together, and when they finally begin to kindle a flame of love, the very seams of their bond are ripped apart by other characters, unfortunate circumstances, and the cruel nature of the world they live in. They will now have to fight for the right to even stand side by side, much less live a happy life together, as the story constantly puts their relationship under unrelenting strength testing. Yet, this is what enables their love to flourish. Their battles become even more difficult challenges, some of which they have to face with their individual strength, and other situations prevent them from always being together. Yet these hardships only make their love grow stronger. The first instance of such an immense struggle happens during the third arc, which sees the two separated for a majority of its chapters. Because of some terrible outcomes of the previous arc, they are pushed down two different paths and have to become stronger as individuals if they ever hope to achieve their shared dreams. When their paths do eventually reconvene, it's a truly wonderful moment that highlights their complete and utter unwillingness to give up on each other. Even if the world tells them that their relationship is doomed, they endlessly fight to prove it wrong until they can once again embrace each other. There's something so beautiful about how as they grow older and face harsher realities, their unfiltered love shines through and triumphs over any obstacle. Looking back at their first meeting and following that through line to the end, it's a genuinely special experience to witness how much they grow and change, both as individuals and as lovers who fully support and cherish each other. The progression of time in Twin Star is incredibly worthwhile because it develops these two stubborn brats who can't set aside their differences into the most tender pair of lovers. That love, which started as bitter contempt, is forged through many years of tribulations and bloody battles. That transformation is an endlessly rewarding experience that continuously builds on the good faith of their love. Not only can you see their emotional maturity and romantic dynamic changing with time, but they also physically grow into adults. They evolve from this to this. Their physical appearances reflect the glow-up of their personalities. Rokuro, who used to be a tiny shrimp of a boy, has spilled out into a muscular man that can take care of you, and Benio, who was a gremlin of a girl, has developed into a true beauty that can still kick your ass. It's unfair just how hot they become, but you won't see me complain about it. Granted, I'm gonna find Benio super attractive when she's got thighs like this, but even Rokuro makes me question my sexuality a tiny bit. That's how you know a mangaka is equally excellent at drawing men and women. Their undeniable hotness aside, it's super cool that Twin Star takes place over so much time and that nearly half of the story spans their adult lives. While I don't mind following teenagers in shonen manga, I can't deny how enjoyable it is to watch these two grow up. Additionally, the momentum of Rokuro and Benio's relationship is greatly helped by the progression of time, as it highlights different time frames of their lives. As young teenagers, they have to learn how to work together. As older teens, their battles push their love to bloom, and as adults, they have to fight to maintain their happy lives together. Each stage of their life offers a new dynamic, and the chapters that span their adult years are simply the best. By this point, their relationship has been nurtured to its fullest, and that makes it all the more painful that this is also when everything seems to only get worse for the Twin Stars. The only thing that can keep pulling them through it all is their everlasting love, just like it always has. No matter how difficult their lives are, no matter what challenges they face, and no matter how many times they are torn apart, they find their way back together. Unfortunately, I feel that this is the time to address the 2016 anime adaptation by Studio Pierrot because the entirety of this progression is put through a meat grinder, thrown into a burning hot fire, and eviscerated to a crisp. For anyone who doubts the quality of this series by using the anime as a benchmark, I understand, but please don't. I've made an entire video about the anime's laundry list of failings, but to summarize, the adaptation completely misrepresents its source material while also fumbling on its own merits backwards into an abyss of mediocrity. The parts of the story adapted from the manga were butchered. The original story was painfully dull, the pacing was drawn out, the production was clearly not a priority for the studio, the characters were shells of their manga counterparts, and worst of all, it betrayed my very reason for loving the series in a scene that I can only describe as my own personal Eclipse experience. I understand how you feel, Guts. I really do. What really hurts is that anime adaptations are often an opportunity for a manga to become a breakout hit. Adapting a manga that was less than 10 volumes into its publication and turning it into a 50-episode anime was extremely questionable, especially when only 5 of those volumes get poorly adapted and the rest are abandoned for a slog of an anime original story. This entire mess squandered the manga's best shot at becoming a larger success. I do understand there are fans of the anime, and I don't want to take that away from anyone. I merely hope for any fan of the anime to seek out the manga, because it goes much further into the characters' personal stories and relationships. In short, whether you did or did not like the anime adaptation, I urge anyone to put aside the anime and give the manga a fair chance. I do need to make a concession though. The manga is not perfect either. I adore Twin Star Exorcist to the moon and back, but there are a handful of minor criticisms that I see tossed its way fairly often, and I feel as if those should be addressed. I try to be impartial in representing common criticisms, although as I go through these complaints, I will make some counterpoints. Call me the devil's advocate, because I'm willing to acknowledge potential faults, but I really want to shine a more positive light on this hidden gem of a manga, including even its most controversial faults. For example, let's go back to what I said at the very beginning. Twin Star Exorcist is not amazing in the same way some other battle shonen are. What I meant by that was, as a battle shonen, Twin Star does not capitalize on all the strengths of being an action series. While these battles are packed full of energy, which is amplified by some stellar artwork and great designs, the power system of Exorcism is pretty lackluster. The fights are best when they focus on simple hand-to-hand combat, and easily the worst when it's just Rokuro firing off glorified laser beam spells. While there's a handful of characters with interesting abilities, most of them blend together in a fairly uninteresting mix of spell powers, enchanted gear, and basic attacks. Unfortunately, that largely includes the main characters. I love their suit upgrades, power-ups, and transformations, but for story and design purposes, not necessarily because they dramatically change their abilities. However, what I would argue is that I never really cared about the powers to begin with. What locked me into these conflicts were the personal stakes at risk, the genuine concern that a character I like could perish, and the emotional turmoil that would result from every battle. Each exchanged blow is an intense and dramatic clash of love, hatred, and heartbreak. Additionally, the genre fusion of action and romance changes what I am seeking out of these battles. I am not particularly focused on how two abilities react against each other as if I'm reading a stand battle in JoJo. Instead, my attention is honed in on how the enemy in front of Rokuro and Benio will alter the course of their relationship. That's what's important here, not the complexity of exorcism. Fanservice is all over the place in Twin Star. These scenes tend to be fairly brief, however common, and usually don't distract from the action or story. In fact, most of the fanservice is totally welcome by me, because as I've said before, the men and women both are drawn very well, with the ladies especially having a nice variety of body types. However, a good bit of it is featured pre-time skip, meaning yes, they are 14 or 16 years old during some fanservice scenes. I don't have any reason to argue against potential readers being uncomfortable with that, and that's why I put out disclaimers about this type of content. It could be seen as weird, yeah, but the only counter I would make is that while it is a conversation to be had, this issue is not specific to Twin Star and finds its way into even the most beloved manga. I won't be petty enough to go down the list, but if you can enjoy a majority of popular Japanese media in good conscience, then you shouldn't suddenly have a problem here. Obviously, anyone else is allowed to feel whatever way they want on this topic. No sane person will say you have to be okay with fanservice of teenage characters, but I think it's a little strange that I've seen this criticism of Twin Star pop up time and time again, when plenty of other manga have the exact same content and no one bats an eye. Frankly, my stance has always been that fanservice of minors is not my cup of tea, especially if they're drawn to look younger, but I'm not personally offended so long as no real-world minors are hurt. It would be completely valid for someone's enjoyment to be dampened by these problems, although my own enjoyment is hardly affected because I have built up a tolerance for these sort of things over my nearly 15 years of being an anime fan. Also, to be completely fair to Twin Star, the fanservice of minors eventually ceases to exist by the nature of the characters growing up. Nearly half of the story takes place in their adult years, so a lot of the fanservice you'll be seeing is of adult characters, which is more than what I can say for a lot of battle shonen. Because of that, I don't feel as if the fanservice was explicitly made because they were minors, and that was more of a consequence of the story taking place over many years, and him wanting to just draw titties. And yeah, I won't deny it, any of the fan service found later into the manga I can get behind. I'm a big fan of how he draws women in these later volumes. Besides, if the art Tsukino posts on Twitter is anything to go by, his taste is more in favor of thick, big-boobed, and muscular women. That's what he seems to enjoy drawing the most, anyway. Another common complaint, and most damning of all, is Benio herself, or rather how she is portrayed in the story. She is sometimes relegated to being a damsel in distress and needs to be saved by Rokuro, holding her back from showing her true strength in battle. This is yet again a somewhat valid point. Let's be open and honest about the situation. Rokuro is the protagonist, and that can be felt in all corners of the manga. He is the one who gets the most winning blows against enemies. He is the one that we spend the most time with, and he is the one that most embodies the heroic spirit of battle shonen. While she is the secondary main character, we primarily follow his point of view. On top of that, they are forced to separate for extended periods, which means that she will never have the same amount of page space as him. She is absent from large sections of the story, and that can be disappointing for fans of her character. The bigger worry is that when she is around, she is often made to be weak, put in distress, or lacks agency. While it is true that I would love to see Benio get more wins under her belt, I would also argue that a character's number of victories does not determine the sum of their worth. If you expect Benio to have the same presence on the battlefield as Rokuro, you will be disappointed, and in a way, missing the point. While he's busy fighting Kagare, she's fighting an entirely different kind of battle, one that's more internal and less external. Her battle is the uphill struggle to overcome personal trauma, fears, and doubts. It's about her learning to accept herself for who she is, and all the burdens that come with it. Also, she can live a happy life with Rokuro. Sometimes she has a personal revelation that develops her self-understanding, and other times the crushing weight of her reality makes her run away into an escapist fantasy. From forcing her to be apart from her loved one to shunning her for the very nature of her existence, the world is not kind to her. Yet because Benio truly loves Rokuro, she is always able to stand back up and find her way back to his side. Looking at her character through the lens of Twin Star Exorcist being a romance story, Benio is stronger than any other Exorcist. She is not strong because she wins the most fights. She is strong because she carries the heaviest burden of any Exorcist. She is strong because she constantly makes sacrifices for others, and she is strong because she still manages to keep walking forward despite it all. Calling her a simple damsel in distress does not reflect all the inner strength that she has. These inner battles are not easy. They are terrifying nightmares that reflect the darkest parts of who she is, and she's left with deep emotional scars. But with an occasional helping hand, she's able to come out victorious over her inner demons. My point is, regardless of my desire to see Benio kick more ass, I feel as though her weaknesses, and thereby her strengths, were deliberate and purposeful. I also think it's worth asking the question, is it wrong for Benio to be saved by Rokuro? One of the core messages of Twin Star Exorcist is that people should share their burdens and rely on one another for help. You can even see the direct results of not seeking help within a few other characters, who ultimately realized that they underestimated the necessity to rely on others. They try to take on the burden themselves without first leaning on the loved ones around them. Benio needs Rokuro to help her because that's the point. Part of love is helping your lover when they need you the most. This also goes for Rokuro, just in a different sense. When a battle starts to look grim, it's always Benio who steps in to give him the extra push he needs to win. He couldn't do it all on his own, and the story isn't afraid to highlight when he is the most helpless. Whether he needs help from Benio or his fellow Exorcist, neither Twin Star can accomplish all their goals with only their individual strength. In shonen manga, there's a clear, stereotypical image that a majority of protagonists adhere to. Spiky hair, loud screaming, and a good-natured heart. These are stories that are meant to inspire a young, impressionable audience, so the protagonist is essential in creating an ethos of youthful energy and positivity. Some readers may find themselves disillusioned with this archetype of hero, whether they've grown tired of the repetitive nature of these characters or have simply outgrown them. but I continue to find myself consistently endeared to characters like Naruto, Luffy, Hinata, and of course, Rokuro. His endless optimism is key in counterbalancing how dark and oppressive the story can be, and his childhood dream to exorcise all the Kagare is motivated by a genuine desire to help others. While that doesn't make him stand out from the crowd, I mean, defeating all the bad guys and saving the world is a pretty basic goal for a shonen hero, it's not a bad crowd to be a part of. Then what is it that makes him distinct from the rest of his fellow loudmouth, spiky-haired goofballs? Well, just like how the genre fusion of action and romance makes Twin Star more unique, in addition to being a battle shonen hero, Rokuro is a romance lead, and this is where he truly shines as a protagonist. As mentioned before, it's Benio who reignites that flame inside of him. His dream to exorcise the Kagare and save the world is often driven by his love for her. In Benio's darkest moments, Rokuro always shows her great acts of kindness and is ready to help her at a moment's notice, even if it means jumping into a battle that could cost him his life. He's rough around the edges, sure, but he consistently proves to be nothing less than a man of loyalty, courage, and empathy, all important qualities for a hero and lover alike, and that's what Benio sees in him. A significant moment for developing Rokuro as a romance lead can be seen in the conclusion of the second arc. Benio finds herself in a dark place after being told that she lost all of her spell power, the prophecy might be wrong, and that she cannot follow Rokuro to Tsuchimikado Island. To make things worse, she lost the hair clips that he gifted her 2 years ago after their heartbreaking battle with Yuto. As she apologizes for being weak and careless, Rokuro hands her the lost hair clips. Without being asked to, he went to Magano on his own, searched for every broken piece, and had them put back together for Benio. In this moment of complete weakness, Benio can't help but fall to her knees and cry out of sheer happiness. Despite all the darkness holding her down, his kindness sheds all of her worries away as she promises to catch up to him and sends him off with their first kiss. It's this thoughtfulness that makes Rokuro such an endearing romance lead, and is the reason why Benio falls in love with him, despite their differences. Ultimately, Rokuro is not the most unique shonen hero ever, but that might be missing the forest for the trees. Yes, he is a spiky-haired protagonist with a huge mouth, but by being Benio's lover, he is one of the most incredible main characters out there. There's never a moment where he forgoes her feelings or doesn't consider how he can make her happier. Her life is incredibly difficult, and the responsibility of being the Great Yin is a heavy burden, but Rokuro does everything in his power to give her a good home. Of course, Rokuro needs Benio too. She is the one who motivates him to step forward, and she is the one who stands by his side no matter how difficult. They complete each other as yin and yang, as husband and wife. That's what it means to be together. That's what it means to be married, and that's what it means to be soulmates. One of my favorite things about reading manga is taking a look at the first page and following the evolution of an artist through to the very last panel. In the case of Yoshiaki Tsukino, we can go even further back to his first series, Good Luck Girl, and the progression since then is actually stunning. While the later art of that series resembles the early art of Twin Star, all you need to do is look at the first chapter to know that Tsukino made massive improvements in his artistry. The faces are horrifically long and sharp, with a general sense of amateur skill in creating manga. Some mangaka seem to enter the industry with a debut that has excellent artwork, but it's artists like Tsukino that really inspire me. His journey as a manga artist started rough, but eventually he developed a uniquely beautiful art style, improved his design work, and proved that he is among the best in the industry. I would say his art begins to really impress by the midway point of Twin Star's second arc, and starts to peak just before the second time skip. I love the character art so much at this point in the manga. It's during these chapters that the characters look less cutesy than when they were younger, and less overtly beautiful than their later designs, giving them a slight sense of edginess while still being rounded enough to be our lovable heroes. To be totally honest, this is when I believe Rokuro is at his best. I love his white hair and all, but something about the way he's drawn towards the end of this arc and the beginning of the next just works for me. Of course, that's only personal preference, and I wouldn't suggest the art declines in quality in any real metric way. I particularly love the artwork used for chapter and volume covers. Sukeno's rendering style is one of my favorites of any mangaka, and his character art just pops with these colors. I've put multiple of these art pieces as my phone's wallpaper before. I just can't get enough of Sukeno's rendered illustrations. It's a shame that the anime couldn't even have half of this quality in its art direction, because then it would have at least looked good while ruining the story. Speaking of things the anime lacks, the manga has tons of other great characters that aren't just Rokuro and Benio. Admittedly, a majority of them were in the anime, but the adaptation was made so early into the manga's publication, none of these characters had enough to work with. Luckily, in the manga, that isn't the case in the slightest. These characters are significantly more fleshed out and have more to do within the story. The whole cast has a deeply interconnected web of relationships. Each one has a complicated history, and many of them have their own rivalries and personal connections. For example, Rokuro and Benio are connected by being the twin stars, but they are linked with other characters as well. Two of Rokuro's childhood friends are Myra and Yuto. However, Yuto is also Benio's brother, and Myra becomes her love rival during the early parts of the story. Additionally, Seigen is Myra's dad and mentor of Rokuro, Yuto, and Shimon, another character who develops a bond with Myra and a friendly relationship with the twin stars. All 6 of those characters somehow have a relatively strong connection with, at most, 1 degree of separation. We could go even further and add more characters to the web, but hopefully you get the point. The interconnectedness of its characters builds strong relationships. This aspect of character cast is often overlooked by authors and readers alike, but it's important for strengthening the synergy of characters. This is merely one example of how unified this cast is, which is great because there are tons of names to remember. It's as if their presence alters the chemistry of the entire story, and if something were to happen to them, it would send a ripple felt by every character. It serves to give every single exorcist weight within the grander picture and the ongoing war against the Kagare. I would argue that is far more than what could be said of most battle shonen. Often these types of stories have supporting characters who are beloved by the reader but are ignored by the author, but that isn't the case in Twin Star. Seemingly everyone has a meaningful place in this world. Although having a place in this world usually results in a difficult life, there's little semblance of peace to be found here, and the peace that is here is under constant threat. The world of Twin Star is surprisingly brutal and unforgiving, as living as an exorcist seemingly guarantees suffering great losses. Being an exorcist means carrying crushing trauma on your back, and worst of all, if you somehow manage to overcome your trauma, there's still a looming threat of the Kagare above your head. You see this no more evidently than on the battlefield, where there's never conflict without sacrifices to be made. Whether it's a smaller, more personal battle between a few characters, or these massive, grandiose wars between exorcists and Kagare, the humans seemingly always come out with emotional damage, physical injuries, and some body bags. Twin Star may look exceptionally cute on the outside, but it does not pull punches. An absurd number of exorcists will die or witness the brutal ends of their loved ones. These are not characters that only serve to increase the death count either. They are often multi-layered, complex people with compelling histories, and you become intimately familiar with them throughout the story. When the axe falls, it's a genuine gut punch. An important aspect of Twin Star that I've yet to touch on is the concept of yin and yang, as well as the Kagare, who represent the negative emotion of humanity as a literal embodiment of yin energy. While initially portrayed as simple-minded monsters, a cast of characters nearly as varied as the Exorcist forms over the course of the story. A decent amount of them are developed through their own relationships, have emotional backstories, and grow as individuals, but a majority of these characters end up being fodder, and only a few come close to being as compelling as the Exorcist. Perhaps the most notable Kagare is Kamui, the one responsible for killing Benio's parents and a constant presence in the story. I have grievances with his portrayal and especially his relationship with Benio, which seemingly never gets a proper resolution, but I do find him to be an interesting X-factor in the dynamic between Kagare and humans. Through him, we can see that Kagare have an ability to change as people, which is a fundamental building block in our understanding of their kind. He becomes more human-like over his many interactions with the Twin Stars, and eventually becomes an ally. However, I mention the Kagare not as a means to discuss individual characters, but to bring attention to their role in the story. As the personification of negative energy, they are the natural-born enemies of Exorcist. Or are they? During the final arc, we learn about Outcast Valley and the Kagare that live there. Unlike the ones we've come to know so far, who manifest all of humanity's worst traits to enact great violence, the Kagare of Outcast Valley live quietly, have families, and avoid conflict with Exorcist or other Kagare. They live in fear, barely clinging on to the semblance of peace that they know, and that's when it all clicks. Humans and Kagare are not that unalike after all, but are instead two sides of the same coin, yin and yang. It's easy to mistake the Kagare or Yin as simply evil, but as we've seen with Benio becoming the Great Yin, that isn't necessarily the case. It's just another side to humanity, one that deserves compassion. Just as Rokuro and Benio are opposites that complete each other, the Exorcist and Kagare of Outcast Valley discover that they also have to put down their weapons, stop living in fear of each other, and join forces in an effort to end this war. The end stretch of the story pushes the series to its limits, with one of the most impressive and well-executed war arcs of any manga I've ever read. It all sort of starts with the penultimate arc, which features a full frontal attack on the home island of the Exorcist, resulting in the deaths of multiple characters and Benio's ultimate decision to become a Kagare and leave the island for good. This arc is possibly the most downer section of the entire story. There are horrible losses on both sides, the island is completely torn apart, and Benio leaves Rokuro as a last hope to save everyone, who is somehow still alive. Of course, Rokuro is completely heartbroken, but he sets out on a journey to bring back his wife, leading to self-discovery, more anguish than ever, and an all-out war to determine the fate of the world and the Twin Stars. If I were to think about what I would want out of this sort of climax, I would list the following. Larger-than-life fights to highlight the apex of the power scale. Every important character gets their shining moment in a fight. High stakes, including the possibility of emotionally gut-wrenching deaths. The main characters get their final power-ups and transformations. The final story revelations to be eye-opening, and the themes of the series to be wrapped up in the final conflict. For example, a manga like Naruto manages to hit a couple of those notes, but as much as it has plenty of highlights I love, I find myself wishing that certain characters got a meaningful battle, or that the consequences of the war could be felt a little more. Although, to be fair, it is a massive undertaking to wrap up such a big story that's overflowing with great characters. It's hard not to disappoint under those circumstances, but that's why Twin Star is so impressive, because for me, its final arc checks every item on that list. The war feels massive because the battleground is huge, and the characters are allowed to go all out with their attacks. It's flashy, it's a spectacle, and it's exciting to read. The conflicts are cataclysmic, full of raw power, and perfectly highlight the apex of the power scale. Additionally, and more importantly, the fights are varied, with Rokuro and Benio sometimes taking a back seat, leaving other characters a chance to have their big, life-altering battles. In a story with this many characters, there's the risk of A, a majority of the characters being ignored, and B, too much bloat if those characters are given focus. Yet Twin Star was successfully able to dodge both problems by focusing on the select characters that still had more to accomplish, giving backstories to the last few characters that were saved for the endgame, teaming up Exorcist in battle so that everyone can share page space, and making sure every 12 Guardians member that was prominent in the war had a shining moment of their own. In particular, Shizuru, a character that otherwise takes on a supporting role, was given nearly an entire volume and one of the best fights in the series series to conclude her arc. Her opponent is the massively powerful Gabara, a Kagare that has previously managed to kill multiple 12 Guardians. This is no throwaway conflict. A battle of this magnitude, especially this far into the chapter count, typically would be exclusive for the main characters, but this was Shizuru's fight to win. Not every character has a one-on-one battle with an emotional climax, but that wasn't ever needed. Instead, they each have a significant role to play in the war and its many encounters. Even in the fight between Shizuru and Gabara, other Exorcists get in the ring and take a good shot at him. While I wouldn't go as far as to say every character involved was some pivotal piece to the puzzle, it is satisfying seeing so many characters actively participating in the war, whether or not they're getting winning blows. Some characters get a surprising amount of page space as well, such as Tadara, who had been previously a little neglected, but now is being given a central spotlight in the fight against Sakanashi, the secondary and most prominently featured antagonist. It should be noted that the Exorcists are almost always at a disadvantage, so it makes sense that they have to use their combined strength to beat the enemy. Yet, that is still not always enough. In this war, a surprising number of characters are killed, despite fighting alongside their comrades. These are not throwaway deaths, they're devastating losses of characters that have been around for a long time. Likewise, Twinstar doesn't stoop so low as to start killing off everyone left and right. I'm legitimately still surprised that Sagan lives through everything, despite how many times I thought he was heading towards his death. It hits a sweet spot of putting some characters in their grave and keeping a few choice favorites alive, creating high stakes that will make you wonder who will be able to survive such a harsh war. Despite all that, the arc remains consistently fun to read, and you can really see this with all the crazy power-ups and transformations in these volumes. In Twinstar, having sensible power systems is admittedly secondary to the role of cool. Sometimes the character receives a new transformation for the sake of it being awesome, but if you don't need your battle shonen to be smothered in complexity, it pays off because these are some of the coolest looking transformations ever put on paper. Tsukino is a fantastic artist and an even better designer. There's a sense of beauty to a lot of these designs, while others are crafted from the essence of badass. Benio's transformations especially play with my heart. You've got the definition of elegance, a batshit crazy yandere, and the actual depths of hell, which I can only express my love for through my first reaction. Whoa! What the fuck is that? What the fuck is that? Ah! This is 100% cool, 0% Benio. Fucking stop, Tsukino. We're getting further away from happiness and I don't like it. Stop! Seriously, this might be my favorite design of any power-up in any manga. I love how she's completely drenched in black ink, with only the contrasting Kagari markings and piercing white eyes cutting through the darkness, and the idea of the Great Yin being corrupted by overwhelming negative emotion. This design perfectly reflects the depths of her suffering. Not only that, if we go back to evaluate the criticism that Benio is underutilized or that she needs to be saved, it kind of falls apart during the final arc. Benio is not an antagonist per se, but she is a force to be reckoned with. Watching her completely overpower Exorcist and Kagare alike is one of the most exciting parts of this final arc, and it all starts with Benio giving in to her darkest side. Granted, she is partly possessed by the King of Kagare, but this horrid monster that's brutalizing everyone, the negative emotions that are fueling the dark yin energy, and the one that's been subjected to having the King of Kagare's power implanted inside of her this whole time, it's all still Benio. She is the one who is putting up one of the most difficult fights in the series. She's just using the corrupted power of the Great Yin in the same way that Rokuro can channel power from the Great Yang. While it is true that Benio needs to be saved, it's less that she's been held captive and more that she's been completely turned into a demon by her insecurities, desires, and hurt. To save her from this state means to help her come out of her dreamlike fantasy, not to beat the bad guy that she's too weak to defeat herself. What I love about these transformations is what they symbolize for her character arc. Her incomplete Kagari princess form foreshadows the instability of the Great Yin. Her Kagari princess form represents her acceptance of self and embodies her love for Rokuro. Her King of Kagari form results in the Great Yin's utter darkness, amplifying her emotional disturbance. Her second possessed form is the face of despair itself, while Benio plunges herself further into escapism. Her fully awakened Great Yin form is the culmination of all the hardships she overcame for the sake of being with the one she loves. And her final form is a fusion with Rokuro, as the Great Yin and Yang can finally coexist in complete harmony. While I did say the transformations in Twin Star follow the rule of cool, I would say Benio has the most narratively cohesive progression in the series, while retaining some of the most visually stunning design work in shonen manga. After Benio has been saved and they are given a date for which the final battle against the King of Kagari will happen, we're put on a deadline for the end of the story. It's baby-making time. The moment is brief, and I say this without hesitation, but the scene where Rokuro and Benio finally make love is so touching. After so much strife, conflict, and turmoil, after these two had to fight tooth and nail to even stand next to each other, after all the time they've spent together and apart, for them to finally come together as one is nothing short of a beautiful depiction of love. Their intimacy is so real. It's awkward, it's painful, and it's tender. Their child, Hikaru, is born of that love, and just as they said they would, they take on the King of Kagari themselves, leaving their child in the hands of their friends and family. With this, the series comes full circle. As early as Chapter 2, Rokuro and Benio were tasked to conceive the prophesized child that would eventually put an end to the war against the Kagare. They were destined to be together, but they denied their destiny, built their relationship on their own terms, and have now had a baby for an entirely different purpose. They have claimed this fight as their own, and now it's time for them to fulfill their dreams of ending this war to save Hikaru from the burden of being the prophesized child. This fight took some time for me to warm up to, but I think I've finally come to not only understand it, but to fully embrace everything it stands for. There's not much action to be had, no big strategy to take down the villain, and certainly not a lot of chapters dedicated to it. The fight is not about Rokuro and Benio overcoming the King of Kagari with strength. It's about love. It was always about love. This battle is not exchanged through fist or spells. This is Rokuro and Benio's combined love versus what feels like an eternity of suffering. They experience the life of the King of Kagare for over 30,000 years, and they nearly lose the battle multiple times. In fact, during those thousands of years in the void, they endlessly argued, just like when they were younger, only this time it was an argument about Ohagi that lasted 1.5 million times, and they even considered divorce many times. However, despite the unimaginable amount of despair they had to go through, their love persisted through anything. Because they could shoulder all the pain together, they were able to live through everything the King of Kagari couldn't bear alone. That's the true message of Twin Star Exorcist. Love triumphs any and everything. Breaking the cycle of the Kagari curse was not a matter of being strong enough Exorcist, it was a matter of being strong enough lovers. In the end, Rokuro and Benio find their answer to the problem of how to exorcise the King of Kagare by merging with her, sacrificing themselves, and becoming the King and Queen of Purification, thus sending her soul back into the cycle of reincarnation. This conflict ends not with a brutal fight to the end, but a gentle, warm embrace. It's a bittersweet end to the Twin Stars, but their story concludes with them giving up their happiness to save everyone, including the King of Kagare. Their selfless act of kindness is what brings peace to the world, and that's how the story seemingly ends. However, there's still one final thing to discuss. Chapter 134. 10 years have gone by, and the chapter follows Hikaru and the newly reincarnated Mirai, the former King of Kagare, as they attempt to solve the crisis that is currently threatening Magano's stability. Working together, the two manage to draw out the power of the King of Purification, split the two worlds apart, and bring Rokuro and Benio's souls back to Earth. While this last time skip is brief, lasting only the final chapter, It's such a poetically beautiful way to end the series, one that rewards love and kindness with an ending full of happiness. This manga, which is so full of bloodshed and suffering, is in equal parts filled with empathy, emotional healing, and positive messages. This is the way that Twin Star Exorcist was meant to be concluded. I know this was a long way of saying I love Twin Star Exorcist, but thank you for hearing me out. It's always a priority of mine to share my love of manga, which I feel are undervalued, so I constantly want to find ways to give these stories the spotlight. There's even a part of me that struggles with ending this video because it means the end of me talking about Twin Star for the foreseeable future. I don't know when or if I will talk about the series at this length again. The manga has now concluded, so I can no longer make chapter reviews. I've already discussed my distaste for the anime at length, and now I've written down all of my thoughts about the manga in this retrospective. However, I guess that's okay. I did my job. Hopefully, after all of my praise of this little gem, new fans will give it a chance, and old fans will be able to take away something new from it. With all that said, I want to extend a final, heartfelt thank you to Yoshiaki Tsukino, and goodbye to the Twin Star Exorcist. This story will forever reside in my heart.